Hello, everyone. Welcome to Censored to Celebrated, episode number 7. It is March 2015. I am thrilled to be here and trying to head into some spring weather here. I don't know how it is for you guys, but here in Austin, Texas, it is still a little rainy and cold, which is pretty unusual for us. We're getting ready for South by Southwest, and usually it's really gorgeous for that. So I'm excited to be springing into spring. I hope everybody who needed to get on live here was able to. I know we have some new circlers coming in. It's good to see new folks, and I am thrilled to be welcoming Krysti Ryan here today. Hi, Krysti. How you doing?
Hi, Melita. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's so fantastic to have you here. I know we've been planning this for a long time. So I want to do a quick introduction of Krysti just before we get into talking about her research. I know folks are really excited about that. As you may know, Krysti is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of California at Davis. She's specializing in gender and family. And her current research is exploring the experience of parents who are raising and supporting gender creative and transgender children. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about all the different terminology, but I know in your actual survey you say gender nonconforming. So it'll be interesting to talk about all the different terms that are being used these days.
Yeah.
And she's really paying particular attention to parents' interactions with social institutions that are often structured around the binary notions of gender, the male-female box. And so that's your research is being called Parenting Outside the Gender Box, which is such a great title. And I know that your hope is that the work will contribute to public policy to promote the inclusion and celebration of gender diversity in schools and communities more broadly. So I am just thrilled to have you here today. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
And let's get started. Can you tell us a little bit about the alphabet soup, which is one of my absolute favorite questions, especially gender. We haven't talked about that as much on this show, is how does gender fit into the whole LGBTQ? Does it fit in there? And what are some of the words or terms that you're finding are most helpful in your work around gender diversity?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think it definitely fits in there. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize and that is becoming more common in public discourse today is, that the T is really about gender and it's not about sexuality at all so much. And especially for these families that I'm talking with and these kids, these children are really not, most of them aren't hitting puberty yet. This really isn't about sexuality at all for these kids. It's about their gender identity and what feels authentic to them in terms of how to present to the world. And I think that's something that is still a little bit foreign to people, especially if you're cisgendered, meaning that the gender that you were assigned at birth matches the sex that you were assigned at birth. For folks like me who are cisgendered, it can be very difficult to think of gender and sex or even gender and sexuality as separate. We kind of experience them as one thing often. And so I think that
really get conflated. I agree. I think that's one of the big challenges with this alphabet soup is that it conflates sexual orientation with gender identity, and kind of to the layperson that can be pretty confusing. So I think it's even confusing for us people who are in this field. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I'm definitely in there.
Can you talk a little bit about, in your research, in the survey you're writing gender nonconforming, but I noticed that you're using more gender creative now, and I know gender spectrum is also using that term. I've heard gender expansive, transgender, gender skew. I mean, what are we using? Gender bending? What are we using these days? What's the most current?
That is a great question. I like gender creative, and I borrow that from Diane Ehrensaft and some other folks in the field who I think are really kind of on the forefront of being leaders in terms of gender inclusion. And I think that the term gender creative really speaks to what these kids are doing. They're looking out at the world and seeing adults and messages that are kind of coming as, you're either a boy or you're a girl, and they're experiencing the world in some way, that doesn't make sense for them. And so they're really coming up with very creative ways of asserting who they are. And sometimes that comes as, it was a mistake. I was born in the wrong body. And sometimes it comes as, I'm kind of 50-50, or, I'm a gender smoothie. So I personally like the term gender creative because I think it really exemplifies what the children are bringing to the table. But in sociology, like on the academic front, gender nonconforming or gender variant is still kind of the common terminology and discourse used in the sociology literature, which of course is where I came to this work from. Right. But it's moving fast. I'm quite sure there are terms out there that I will hear about next week, and I don't even know about yet.
Right. Had you heard this one, gender skew? That was a new one to me. I just saw 3 days ago, I think.
Nope, that's actually brand new to me. I feel like I'm learning a new term all the time.
Yeah. I thought maybe I was behind the curve on that one. So yeah, I found a great graphic that said, love your brothers and your sisters and all your gender skew others, and I just thought that was poetic and fun, and so it was a neat term. So cool. Well, Krysti, let's really start getting into your research. I know you're still collecting data. You still have the survey up that if folks are parenting transgender or gender creative or gender nonconforming youth, that's still available if they would like to share their experiences with you. And you said you're also still conducting some interviews. Is that correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm kind of getting to the end of my interview period, but I still am doing interviews here and there with families that are wanting to tell their story.
Okay, great. And can you tell us, I'm just turning your volume down a little bit. Thanks, Sally, for letting us know. That's good. You're coming through loud and clear, but we don't want you to be so loud that you're overpowering.
No.
So tell us a little bit about how you got started with this research, and what are, like, I don't know, 3 really interesting preliminary findings that you're able to share with us. I know it's hard when you're still collecting data. You don't want to share too much, but just sometimes some broad strokes would be great to get a sense.
Yeah, well, I really came to this research as somebody who was, academically and professionally, I've always worked in the areas of gender and family. But in terms of gender diversity in children, that was something that was very new to me. So I really came to it just wanting to learn and be open to this experience and hopefully having it help people. And I set out to interview parents of children who have children between the ages of like 4 to 5 to 16 years of age, so younger children who are gender diverse or transgender. And one thing I think that is really interesting about this project is that it's very quickly become a story about motherhood in particular. And that is not to say that there aren't very engaged, very supportive, wonderful fathers in many of the families that I've spoken to who are, right there with mom in terms of being on board and really affirming their children. But I do find that far and away, it's mom who is engaged in the day-to-day work of affirming the child, and especially in terms of gender advocacy. It's really mom who's kind of out on the front lines, engaging with schools most often, and pediatricians or doctor's offices or the insurance companies. And so that has been something that's really interesting for me to see.
And is your sense, hang on, is your sense about that because that's kind of the expected gender role that we have in this culture, or is it about time? Like, unpack it a little bit, if you can, or if that's becoming clear. I don't know how we can get under that question of why is it moms?
I think that there are quite a few things going on with it. I think that one of the big things is that across the board, women are still predominantly the ones who are doing childcare in general in our country. That's just very common. But that is actually something that I ask moms, and dads. I ask anyone I talk to. It just so happens that for this, project, I've really spoken to mostly moms. And people give me kind of a wide range of answers, but I mean, some of it is structural. You know, a lot of situations, mom is home with the kids more often, and I think when you're the parent that's home with the children, you're more connected to these issues, right? You see it every day. You see the discontent and the kind of struggles around identity, and you're the one that's there most often to provide that support or reach out for those resources. But I think that, and maybe connected to that, it does seem that there is an underlying trend in my data that moms seem to get on board just a little bit sooner than dads in a lot of cases, that moms are ready to make the transition if that's what needs to happen in a family, just a bit before dads often, that it takes a little longer for dad maybe to wrap his head around what's going on. But again, I think that that's very reflective of time spent with the children and some of those structural factors in our society that support mom as the primary child care provider.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, and I'm curious, are you seeing mostly mom-dad families? Are you seeing a lot of single parenting going on here? And what about other family structures, you know, more than two parents? Queer parents, LBG, you know, along the LGBTQ spectrum. What's your sense in your data on that?
So predominantly the families that I've spoken with so far are heterosexual. And there's pretty great diversity in terms of parents that are in family structure. I set out to talk to parents who specifically are co-parenting, regardless of their marital status or, you know, living together. So everyone in my study is co-parenting in some way. And within that, we have parents who are, you know, married and both the biological parent of the child, or parents who, you know, it's mom and a stepdad or stepdad and stepmom, and, you know, parenting between multiple households.
Right. So the blended family. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we have a question here from Sally, and I want to bring this in of what happened to using queer, and she brought this up when we were talking about the alphabet soup, and I guess I just wanted to ask you, are you noticing that that's a term that's being used by families and by youth at all?
You know, that actually has not come up in my research. I definitely do see that still used among adult circles that I travel within, using genderqueer as a way to identify. But I have not heard in my sample parents or children identifying as genderqueer. Or actually, I've heard some parents identify themselves that way, but not for the children. I get a lot more, they say, oh, you know, gender nonconforming, or transgender, or when we're talking about kids. And that is really interesting. I hadn't really thought much about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Sally, for that question. Yeah, it'll be interesting now that we've talked about that, just what you start seeing in your data or not, if it really is just not there, not part of the lexicon being used with this particular group of folks. So tell us about, we're going to go to the aha moment, just to give you a warning here. Tell us about an aha moment, and I know you were telling me about one that was really interesting when you went to a conference recently around gender and around how this is just changing so quickly. So what's an aha moment that has really inspired your thinking around gender and gender diversity?
Well, so I attended the Gender Spectrum Conference for the past several years. It's one of my favorite events throughout the year. And at this past Gender Spectrum in July, I was really struck by just how quickly the discourse is moving on this topic. You know, 2 years ago when I attended the conference, it was very much focused on supporting children as they transition socially. So it was very much, still staying within the boxes, but we're just moving from one to another with a lot of these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as we have more public awareness for this issue and as more families come forward, it's really pushing the way we need to talk about this, and that wasn't really working for all the families, and that there are a lot of families out there who need to start talking about that in-between space. What if their child doesn't identify as a girl or a boy, if they're somewhere in the middle or a little bit of both or neither? And so this conference, I was just really struck by the focus on the spectrum and then, truly being outside the binary, and how much was given to that in terms of resources and support for families. And I think that just illustrates how quickly we're moving, that we're making social space for kids that aren't feeling comfortable in any box. Whereas a few years ago, even moving boxes was unheard of. So I think that that's a really significant step that we're taking.
Yeah, I was struck by that as well. So I think it's interesting because you're really going into depth with this, that you're noticing that. I've noticed just in talking to my older kids that there's a lot more understanding of pronouns, in a way that I was never aware of that as a child, like what's your preferred gender pronoun, and maybe somebody who's in the middle or not, who knows, where they're not quite sure, they're not fitting into they're outside the box somewhere, right? Just to, they want to use they, and that's to my grammatical ears, sounds so strange. And so it's been a real getting used to, it seems like almost we've been moving away from the here and z and that sort of thing into just a they as the third pronoun. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Yes, I have noticed that. I've actually spoken with several families who are really struggling with that issue in school, right? And what pronouns to have the school use for their child that isn't feeling like she or he is appropriate for them. And they does seem to be the most popular, but as you just noted, it's one challenge that parents are running into is that it's very, very hard to introduce they as a pronoun to a class full of second graders who are learning about grammar.
Yes.
Because that throws a little wrench in everybody's, they're grammatically, it does sound odd to us. So that's a whole new challenge.
Yeah, and I wonder if they're learning it then that it's appropriate and it's acceptable and it's fine if they won't have that kind of trigger that I get with it of like my grandmother's voice, who's an English teacher, saying that's not correct, So maybe it's part of what we see happening with youth, just around kind of understanding spectrums and complexity a lot more easily than the adults in their lives sometimes do. So I have a question for you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to note that children, often in my study, it seems like children are the ones that come to this very easily, and that when issues pop up for families, the issues are really coming from other adults in their lives. But the children are very open and supportive of one another around these areas, by and large, it seems.
Which seems really hopeful, that because they're going to need the support of their peers. So that's great to hear that that's another trend you're seeing, is that there's support from the other children. Though I know there's a lot around anti-bullying, so I imagine there's still some of that. Do you see that that's coming from an adult influence, or what's that about? Because we do still see bullying happening.
Yeah, I think I think there are a couple things that might influence it, but certainly the parents that I talk to, something I hear pretty consistently from parents is everything was fine at school until kids started telling their moms and dads, and so the sense from other parents is that this really does come from adults, because they transition, school's going fine until the other kids go home and tell their friends, like, oh, did you know that, John is Sarah now? And that's when they start having issues. So for as much as I can get purchase on that in the way I'm doing my study, that's certainly what parents feel is happening a lot of the time.
So again, it's still stemming back to the adult understanding and the challenges that adults are having around this. Interesting.
Yeah.
I want to bring a few comments in. Glenn says they has been used as a singular pronoun since before Shakespeare, usually for indeterminate gender. Thank you for that. That's new to me. I mean, I definitely had that grandma who was saying it was not accurate. So, um, and then we've got another comment here from Sue. Going back to your first trend about moms and just kind of the trend you noticed around moms being able to support children maybe a little bit more comfortably or sooner with their kids. And she's saying, do you think it is because females are more in tune with their kids' feelings in general, just because we are women, or is there something else going on maybe?
So it's actually really interesting. I often ask families, why do you think this is, that mom has gotten there a little faster than dad? And people do kind of often speak to that mother's instinct or a mother's intuition in terms of being able to support their children. And I think that there is definitely a part of that. I mean, women in our culture, I'm a sociologist, so they focus on the way we interact socially. And women, far more than men in our culture, are encouraged to be in tune to other people's feelings and to be empathetic and to be mindful of the way their actions influence others. Men are not encouraged to do that as often. And I think that does play a role here. Does it sound okay? Is there something I can do?
No, you are fine. I am just responding to people's comments. Thank you everybody for just helping out with the volume. I'm on a new computer, so it's a work in progress. So what I wanted to get to, and it's so great to talk about the research and to get your insights into this. And I know we have a private chat coming up for folks who are on my email list for Censored Celebrated Emails. It's an exclusive opportunity. And also I invited some folks from different communities that I belong to, and I know, Krysti, that you're connected with, to invite them in for 7 people to join us for a chat. And we'll be able to talk more about that when we do that. But I did want to get to, just in this live part, we have about 7 more minutes, and I just wanted to get to one of my absolute favorite questions, which is, what's a time in your life, and it can be around anything around diverse sexuality and gender, though it may be about your research, where you really felt like you either had to self-censor or you felt censored around diverse sexuality and gender topics, either professionally or personally, and how did you deal with that? What was your take?
So I actually feel like I've had a lot of these little moments recently. I just became a parent myself 4 months ago. I have a daughter now, and it has been, so in her book, Diane Aronsoff talks about, gender angels and gender demons that pop up in our lives. And I come back to that so often now, having my own daughter. We try to be very mindful about have a really diverse array of clothing for her, and offering her things that kind of are all across the spectrum in terms of gender. And it has been very interesting to watch people respond to that. And certainly we have felt censored at times when we choose to, something as simple truly as putting her in a blue snowsuit this winter, a powder blue snowsuit, which I don't consider to have any gender connections at all, was something that I could tell, people are thinking like, oh, Krysti, she's so crazy liberal hippie or something, and she's putting her daughter in blue. And those kind of moments really are shocking to me. And then on the other hand, we have the ability to really celebrate gender with our daughter, which is fantastic.
I know you were talking about your feeling censored to celebrate it around just kind of what outfits even. It's amazing how alive and well this is in our community and in our spaces, that children are still so incredibly gendered. And I wondered if have you at all felt like you've been able to move from feeling censored around that to feeling more celebratory?
Yeah, I actually think that this research has been an incredible opportunity to, in my own life, help people expand their notions of gender. So, and just in talking to people about what I get to do for a living, I'm able to
And
Oh, there we go.
in the same way, we're able to, start those conversations when I notice people reacting oddly to us dressing our daughter in blue, of all things.
Right.
Um, so, yeah, it's been a cool opportunity. And I've seen people in my life, through doing this work, really evolve their ideas around gender, which has been, even my grandfather, my 90-year-old grandfather almost, has just learned so much and opened his mind so much around this topic, just as a result of me doing it for work,
Got it. Mm-hmm.
which has been great. I feel very lucky to do that.
Fantastic. Well, we've got some other questions, and of course, because I got disconnected, I can't pop them up on the screen, but I wanted to touch on it very quickly, and then we're going to wrap up and go into the private chat. But we have a comment from Kim, and she says, can you tell us a little bit more about the demographics in your study, how many people were interviewed or will be interviewed, and diversity around race, class, age of kids, etc.? And I'm going to come back over.
Sure. I am still I'm very much in the process of data collection and kind of analysis. So I don't have like hard and fast numbers for all of that, but predominantly white, middle class folks that I've talked to so far, geographically very diverse, which has been a real blessing for my study. It's wonderful to talk to people that are kind of all over and get different perspectives. And really, generally speaking, with families of younger children who are maybe, 5 to 9. I do have a handful of folks in my study who are raising and affirming teenage kids or preteen.
Okay.
But as more families, I think, come to this at earlier and earlier ages, I'm getting more families in my study that are kind of on that end. I'm really just transitioning at pretty young ages.
Okay.
And the majority of the kids in my study do identify as transgender.
Okay.
And have made social transitions, although there's probably a third of the kids consider themselves nonconforming, or a boy who likes girl things, or will say, I'm a girl who just feels like a boy some days.
So maybe more that fluidity, the gender fluid that we hear about.
Yeah. But most of the kids are putting themselves in a box. So I just have a few instances of kids that really say, nope, I'm neither, or I really truly feel like both.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up this part, and I'm glad we got you all clear at the end here. I hope everybody was able to hear that. And I know when I go to the final editing, I will take some of that stuff out that just doesn't work in an interview, so that it'll be a little easier to watch. And Krysti, when we go to this private chat, I know people can ask you more questions, but I'm hoping that folks, if you're not able to stay for the chat, I think we do have a couple spots, so let me know if you do want an invite. But that we'll try to do a little bit of answering questions in the comments afterwards, so that if we didn't get to everybody's question because of our disconnect there, we can get to that in about half an hour or so. And in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me for this part, for the live part, and looking forward to the private chat in just a few minutes, and I'll be sending that link out to everyone. And for everyone who joined us today, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. This is such a timely topic. I know it's being really gotten to the mainstream in a huge way, especially in 2014 and continuing to this year. And there's kind of a light side of that and a celebratory side of that that's pretty exciting, but there's still also some shadows and some challenges around that. And hopefully we'll be continuing to look at that in a future From Censored to Celebrated show. So if you're interested in staying connected here, please go ahead and sign up for my email so that you get all the notifications and exclusive opportunities and that sort of thing. And Krysti, how can we stay in touch with you to find out about your research?
So in my lower third there, I have a website that is set up to facilitate the survey for my research. On the fact page, it also has my contact information if anyone is interested in talking with me more in depth in an interview, or just interested in checking in on my research over time and seeing what I'm doing. I'm always interested in talking with people about it and hearing from families.
Yeah, it's such an exciting topic. I can imagine it would be hard not to want to talk to more and more people and have as much data as you can and information and conversations as you can about this awesome topic. So thank you again. We're going to
Thank you.
sign off for right now. Yeah, and in the meantime, until I see everyone in April, please celebrate all the people in your life. And I think I put out a graphic today that I felt really proud of because I was feeling a little self-censoring about it. So this was my own personal excitement where I said celebrate boys with vulvas and girls with penises, and of course everyone in between. And it's not about anatomy; it's about how we identify. And I think there's some really interesting uh, scientific data that's been coming out for years and years and years, but again, is getting more mainstream traction right now. So it's neat to see that and neat to see people being willing to come out of the shadows and feel more safe to do that. So thanks again. I'll go off right now and we will see everyone who's coming in for the private chat in just a minute. You'll get the link. Okay, and Krysti, you stay right there. All right, bye
Alrighty.
everybody. All right, we're going to stop the broadcast.